out of the area, we're gonna make a little video of it. So Megan set up mostly photos of Bonnie in this panel, and this is my brother Joel and my grandmother and grandfather. This is the view from my family home. We were on a tall hill and looked across at this in Chatsworth, and that's me and my grandmother. This is my dad Bill, Megan with Bonnie's great-grandson. And over here we have Mom's longtime friend Francis, who is still alive. They've been friends since 4th grade. And then the man up at the top is Tomas, whose painting hung at the end of Bonnie's bed, and anybody who ever worked with her heard the story of it and got to take a trip with that. And I hope that afterwards you'll make sure to take a copy. I went through Mom's recipe book and copied up some appropriate ones of her favorites. Can't say I've made them all. I ate them at her house. That was the fun part. So please take one of those. And I'd like to just kind of highlight the features of an amazing woman. Obviously, I'm not at all prejudiced, but Bonnie Jean Lakey was born in Alhambra, California. She's a native Californian. And her parents moved to the town of Chatsworth when she was a toddler. And that's what this looks like. And that picture is actually taken by my grandfather. And her father had nearly 50 acres, and he planted vineyards and citrus. So that's what this little commemorative bowl is for, grapes and citrus. And Bonnie loved grape processing. A couple of times her father let her actually get in the press and fish around. When you're a kid, that's got to be just about perfect. And it was during Prohibition, so the wine that he made had to be surreptitiously shared with people. And at one point, they took the proceeds in 5-gallon glass bottles, jars, whatever, containers, and somehow they were sealed, and on a moonlit night, they buried it in part of the property.
That's cool.
But later, nobody could find it.
Oh, no.
So the big adventure when we were kids, I grew up with four male cousins up the road, was, let's go look for the wine. So we were always digging holes and sifting test holes down, and nothing ever yielded. But somewhere out there is, who knows if the bottles have
Some construction worker found it.
Yeah, no, it's still out there.
Oh.
So when my mother was 8 years old, her father died. And so my grandmother was a widow with 2 young daughters during the Depression. And it's so interesting that my family nobody ever talked about the hardships of it, or they just made do. And they only just talked about how they made do. So they grew food, they took apart clothing and remade it for growing kids. And out of the 50 acres, my grandmother sold off pieces of it to live over that time period. And then when my mother was 14, she married H.C. And H.C. was an architect who was remodeling the elementary school, which was right down the road. And so then my mom ended up having a stepfather, and H.C. was wonderful. So that was the grandfather I got to know. Then in school, Mom met her best friend Frances, who's over in here, in 4th grade. And I talked to Frances on the phone a couple of days ago, and she said we were like sisters all of our lives from that moment on. Frances had a bike. The brand name was Indian, an Indian bike, if you know old-timey bank bikes. Mom did not have a bicycle. So Frances would stand up on the handlebars and pump, and my mother sat on the seat. And the 2 of them made all these adventures all over the place. In the Valley, San Fernando Valley, that way.
Oh, I see, it goes in.
And they both played in the drum and bugle corps, and there's a picture of it right here, and actually Bonnie Jean is right there in the picture, and she played drums, and so did Francis, and they both loved dancing, and that was back in the era of the big bands and the big ballrooms, so that was just heaven for them both. When World War II began, the man who would become my father, Bill Lakey, was in flight school, and he and Bonnie talked by phone and decided to get married. So they married in '41, and then he went overseas to fly missions in Europe, and Mom became a secretary. And Bill flew B-17s, and anybody who's above B-17s knows his airplane. It's called the Southern Comfort. It's probably next in fame to the Enola Gay, which dropped the atom bomb. But his plane crashed more than twice. It had damages. Everybody was always following it. And then the other thing that happened is my dad signed up for 2 rounds, more than 50% casualties in B-17s because they were big, slow flyers, and there weren't companion planes to protect them in the beginning. And so the fact that he signed up for 2 tours of duty and survived and came home, and the second plane survived and came back, made it pretty notable. And Megan and I actually saw footage of him in the cockpit. So after the war, Bill and Bonnie built a house. What happened is my grandmother gave 7 acres to each of her daughters, her 2 daughters, of the remaining land that she had. So that was all the remaining land, and then just the house that my grandparents were in, which is shown right here. This is part of the area, and this is a beautiful 30-foot table that my grandfather built before his death. So I grew up in sandstone and live oaks and tarantulas and rattlesnakes, and we had it all. Bobcats. And the train tracks were our property edge. And all our family had 22 shotguns and pistols, not for protection from other people, but to shoot rabid animals and rattlesnakes. So that's what we all learned to shoot for. And my brother Joel was a foster child with Bill and Bonnie before I was adopted. And he remembers wonderful birthday parties and being taught how to keep your room tidy. So Bill and Bonnie adopted me when I was 6 months old, and they were family friends of my biologic mother, so I periodically saw my siblings. And Bonnie was incredibly resourceful. She could decorate a room with almost no money. She could just take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. She could make curtains. She made drapes for my room. Have you ever looked at the construction of drapes? She could make those things.
Cool.
She made all my clothes until I got married. And I was thinking, sort of the life review after she's passed. My parents had parties of up to 40 people. And I don't know anybody else who had parties like that, with that many people.
And I bet they weren't potlucks.
Right. There
Yeah.
was no potluck,
Right.
there was no catering. And they would just roll on with these days of planning. So they had a New Year's Eve party and a 4th of July party. And Bonnie's potato salad was legendary. And I did look through her recipe book. I never found a recipe for her potato salad. I think she was so used to scaling it up and scaling it differently that she just, knew how to get the consistency right. But I'll tell you one of the secrets. When she was done boiling up the potatoes and poured off the water, she would drizzle apple cider vinegar over the potatoes. And so those skins, all hot, would then soak in that tang. So there's a trick for you. I took ballet during my childhood, in my entire childhood, because I was severely pigeon-toed, and they said either get that kid roller skating or get her in ballet. Well, I lived on a dirt road, so the roller skating was out. And Bonnie did the books for the ballet master, and we hosted the annual recital up in these amazing rocks. So it was one weekend in June. There were more than 100 dancers because the ballet master had classes 4 days a week, 4 different groups of students. And we would host 200 people in the audience each night. Rent the chairs. I remember one time, you know, the porta potty, because they weren't going to go up and use the house. And somebody went around and checked behind the porta potty, and there was a rattlesnake curled up there. So I got rid of that fast. My father, Bill, made the sets. He made the stage. And Bonnie did costumes, banners. She did the program.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was an amazing thing. And it gets, you know, I'm just the kid going, yeah, isn't this what people do? Right, isn't this how it goes? But, you know, you can just imagine Bonnie's creativity just unleashed in all of this.
And energy.
Yeah. So I want to share a remembrance from my best friend, Melissa, she and I go back to 8th grade together. And she now runs a writing program, often for people in hospitals with life-threatening circumstances. So I asked her if she'd share a remembrance, and she said, I remember Bonnie in the shade, always in shade, falling gently across her face from the oak tree above, or shadowed in the coolness of the back porch of the house on an 80-degree day. Always gentle and kind, yet something about her equally bold and unafraid, ready for anything, just like us. She was all for our nature walks, allowing Julia and me to ramble along the train tracks among the weeds and boulders as much time as we needed to fulfill our dreams. By noon, she'd call us in, no rush, and we'd kick our way down the path through the rocks to the house, clutching wildflowers or some stones, a couple of teenage stragglers covered in laughter and dust. And as always, there she stood, face dappled in fun, a friend to the ferns, the cacti, and to the blustery Santa Anas on their way to somewhere else. Bonnie at the door, in the shade, on a hot day, with sandwiches. Sure and strong, funny and sad, waiting to welcome us back home again into the safe harbor of her smile.
Nice.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. So I went away to college near my home, and during that time, Bonnie took Spanish classes and took nurse's aid training with Betty Gage, who lives at the other end here. That's Megan's other grandmother. And she always loved medicine and health issues, and I think if she just charted her own course, she probably would have been a nurse. But she enjoyed volunteering there. And when I moved to Kansas for graduate school, she traveled with Francis to Spain. And when she came home, she said to Bill, I love it over there, I love the culture, everything about it, I want to move there. And my father said, that's fine, but I don't, so off you go. So they maintained a marriage on 2 continents. Mom lived internationally most of the year, and she'd come home about a month out of the year and then come see me, or I'd go down and see her. She would call me from Spain, and it was back when the satellites were terrible. So the phone would ring at 2 in the morning. Oh, okay, it's Mom. And I'd answer the phone, and I could hear her just fine, but then it was echo, oh, oh, whoa, 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 of everything I said. So there I am, half awake, hearing myself reverberating, bouncing off, back over. So it was quite an adjustment. So while she lived in Spain, where she loved the culture, she made friends, she cooked the relishes that you see the recipes for, she cooked chutneys, she made marmalade, she sold them to restaurants. And partway through that time, she had been going across the passage to Morocco, and she decided to move there, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. You know, a single American woman, solo American woman in the 1980s, moving to Morocco on her own. She had a cute little white van, and she lived in Tangiers for 18 months. And she traveled around I think one of her favorite memories was being invited by her Moroccan friends out into the desert where there were Berber festivities and huge bonfires and feasts and dancing. I mean, she was just slicing into another world that most of us, you don't see those on any of the tours. This was incredible. Then when she got back in Spain, she bought herself a condo. She handled all of the legal documents in Spanish by herself.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then kind of
Julia, did your dad ever go and visit her over
yeah,
there?
he did. Yeah, there were times he went there. Yeah. And then, unfortunately, a stiffness started in one leg, and at one point they thought she might have MS. Nobody was quite sure. But I said to her, I went over and visited her finally. You know, I'd been busy raising Megan and building a home and whatever, and I hadn't gone over there. So when I saw her, I said, well, you're getting pretty stiff, and if you want, I'll come back next summer or whenever you decide, but if you stay too long, you're gonna need help moving back. Well, you know about how well that would sit with her, getting help moving back. So she moved back on her own. And then she and Bill, who was in his retirement years, retired to Santa Rosa for a few years. And then I talked him into moving up to Vashon. So they both lived in downtown Vashon for a decade. And then my dad died of cancer, and that's when Bonnie moved in here. And that's 15 years ago and a month that she has lived in this facility. And none of us knew how long that would be, but Dr. Kappelman, her doctor, said, she's gonna live a long time, and he was right about that. So it was a series of strokes that affected her, but she studied health benefits a lot, and one of the things she really credited was the oil of evening primrose. It's supposed to, I think, be good for circulation, because all the women in her family were gone by the time they were in their mid-70s, and here's Bonnie making it to 97. So even as her world shrank into one room, you could experience her warmth, her determination, and courage. She never showed any self-pity, and often when I would come to visit her toward the end, sort of the final thing she would leave me with that I think was her solace too is do the best you can with what you have. And she sure did that every single day. One of her favorite resources is the horoscope birthday book.
They've got to put that out again. That
This
is
is
the
almost
coolest
as
one.
old as she is. And if you knew her very well, she would put your name, put your birth date in here, and then read you what it is. So I'm gonna end by reading you what her birth date horoscope is. And of course, it's general enough that you go, okay.
What's her birthday?
September 7th. Today gives high ideals, tenacity of purpose, physical endurance, and loyal affections. You are honest, just, and a diligent worker. You are esteemed by your associates. You are fond of literature and like to see new surroundings.
Wow.
She lived that one out. So, I want to thank you all for coming, and if anybody who did know her wants to share anything, come on in. You've got the worker clan out there. Do you want to say anything about working with Bonnie, or a favorite
Wilderness.
quote? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You all were really special to her, and that was one of her goals, that she not die in a
I'd
hospital.
like to say something about Bonnie.
Okay, come on in.
Hi. Whenever you're ready.
Come on, come all the way in. Hey, Mike, you're there too. Come on in. I'm done with the formal part. So, I'm done sharing comments, and if you want to share either some favorite aspect of Bonnie or just a remembrance, anything you want to say, this is the time.
I always thought that Bonnie had the best long-term memory. I've never seen anybody that could describe when she was 5 years old at her birthday party or a performance that her mother had created. And she detailed everything from the tips of her toes up to her hair and how it was braided or whatever. She could remember everything. She could sink right in, and she was just there. And she said that was one of the wonderful things about that ability, because when you're locked into your chair and you're in your bed for so long, sometimes she'd just take off and go play around with her friends.
Yep, yeah. She did say to me, going over her memories, she said, I don't make things up. I really remember how this was. I know, Mom, I'm not accusing you of making it up, but I love that line. I don't make things up.
Yeah, and she described how her dad built the barbecue area where everyone would get together for the big parties, and then how the women would dress up their daughters and their little boys, and everybody would just have a great time.
Yeah, we called it the picnic grounds, and that's where the big outdoor parties were in the summertime, and that's where the performance area was for the concert, the recitals, yeah.
It was amazing. She was always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Giggle about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, she had a great sense of humor, didn't she?
She liked you just a little bit.
Yeah, well.
Usually we get in maybe 2 sentences before your name comes.
She was my anchor and I was hers, yeah. One of the last sentences she said to me is, "You've always been my girl." I said, "I always will be. Nothing's gonna change that." Yeah. It's very special. But it kind of worked better after she went to Europe and came back. When we were on the same, in the same space, it took a little while. But once she had that whole international aspect to her life, then our sharing got a lot richer and a lot more fun.
And I didn't mention food. You probably mentioned that. But she was the biggest foodie I've ever run into in my life, and she could do the same thing with her memory, describing, oh, there was this one time in Morocco when I found this new spice, and oh my God, it was wonderful. She was amazing.
Yeah, I put that in one of the recipes here. It's called Lakama, and I believe that's a Moroccan spice, and that's for making the chutney. Sometimes I find variations on her recipes, so everything here is in her handwriting. I thought that made it kind of special. But the one where I found the Lakama, I just added that in, but it was on another sheet of the same kind of chutney, so, yeah.
Nice.
I did the food growing, and she was the one who wanted to do things with food. And I know I was a big disappointment, because I'd come in the afternoon and she'd say, "What are you gonna have for dinner?" And I'd go, "I don't know, I'll figure it out when I get home." And she'd go. Because she and Megan's other grandmother, Betty, would call each other in the afternoon and they'd discuss their dinner menu.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal. And I did do more menu prep when the girls were at home, but once I was down to adults only, yeah. Okay, someone else want to share a memory, recollection?
Well, when I've only known Bonnie since I've been working here, so,
That's most of the time Bonnie's been here.
well, Bonnie was living down together and when I first started, and when she moved down here, she would go down to the dining room to have lunch with her friends, and pretty soon she just stopped doing that.
Got to be too much effort.
Yeah, and so we would always talk about the menus and discuss it. Okay, if you don't want it this way, we can have the kitchen do it this way, or I can make sure we have it done like this, or no, don't worry about that. And then I'd bring in some extra avocados sometimes, and we'd make avocado sandwiches. She just really knew what she liked.
That's for sure,
Yeah.
in all aspects.
I'd walk into the room and if I was wearing something particularly appealing, she would, wow, that's a great shirt or sweater, or turn around, let me see the whole thing. Yeah. She was always with you. In the morning, she'd be reading the newspaper in the dining room, and you'd go in and go, anything interesting we should know? And you talk about a little bit of that, and she was aware of everything that was going on. Everything.
Yeah, and I did not talk to her about the changes here. I could see her deteriorating, and I thought that could really be detrimental. But somehow intuitively, she seemed to pick up on it, because she kept sharing comments, and then her physical condition got, even closer to the end. So I'm just grateful that we didn't have to find her a new home, that she got to live out her final days here. That was what she planned. That's what happened. She didn't end up in a hospital. She was always very careful. She not only had the strokes, but she had diabetes, and she would deny herself fruits, to keep her blood sugar level. And the people would say, "Go ahead and have some. We can." Nope, none of that. I mean, she was, and even 2 weeks before she died, I heard her say to the charge nurse, "Am I doing everything I'm supposed to?" And
Oh my
I thought,
God.
"Oh my God, Bonnie, you're just all the way out. Sail, just sail. It's all fine."
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, she was herself all the way to the end, and I know she appreciated that. None of us get to toss a coin and decide, but the fact that she could remember and recollect her whole life and have conversations with people she cared about right up to the end, that was very, very meaningful.
She loved her cooking shows too.
Yeah, she did.
Trisha Yearwood has the Southern Kitchen or whatever. She really liked her. So I brought in my iPad one day and some headphones that I put a Trisha Yearwood album on, and she listened to her and she goes, "Oh, she's a contralto." Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But she
knew music.
really enjoyed listening to her and putting the music together with what she saw.
Yeah, yeah. That was hard for her to lose her hearing, that she
Yeah.
couldn't enjoy music anymore. Yeah. But again, she never complained.
I know, she never did.
Wow.
Anybody else want to share something?
Just that we'll miss her.
One other thing that was kind of cool was we were talking about life and change and growing older and everything. And she said, "Yeah, I've been in this damn chair for years now." And she said, "Thank God I don't hurt," which was a wonderful thing. She didn't have pain. Maybe near the end she might have experienced something. But she said, "That makes it much easier. And then I've got my memories and I feel good. Every day's another day to live and enjoy." So she was very good.
She really lived in gratitude. Every day she would talk about what she was grateful for. Pretty amazing how it. So, please feel free to enjoy. I made the chicken curry, so don't disappoint.